Welcome everybody. Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Habib and I'm the chair of the Palestinian Solidarity Society. We're very honoured today to welcome Mr. Jeremy Corbyn. Mr. Corbyn is a prominent member of the Labour Party here in the UK. He's been a Labour MP since 1983. He's a member of Amnesty. He's the chair of the Stop the War Coalition and part of the Parliamentary Human Rights Commission. He has visited the region many times. He's been to Palestine 9 times, including the West Bank, 1948, Israel and Gaza. He's visited refugee camps in Syria and in Lebanon. We're very excited to hear you talk about the Middle East, UK foreign policy towards Palestine, the parliamentary vote about Palestine, and just about refugees as well. Thanks all for coming, and we'll just hand over to you, Jan. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me today, and thank you, Habib, for your introduction. I don't know how long your meetings normally go on for, but if I kind of open up and introduce the subject, so we've got plenty of time for any questions and discussion, is that okay if we operate it in that way? My interest in the West Bank, Gaza, Palestine in general, Israel and the refugees goes back a very long way, and I've visited there on many occasions, usually as part of delegations, most times at my own expense, but also at the invitation of the UN on 2 occasions, one to visit Gaza and another to be an election observer, which I was in 2006 also in Gaza on that occasion. I want to start from the quite dramatic situation that happened in Parliament last September. At the end of the bombing of Gaza during last August, when the Israeli army was operating Operation Protective Edge, where very large numbers of people died, there were huge demonstrations all around the world. A number of us managed to secure a vote in the British Parliament, which was saying that the British Parliament should formally recognise the state of Palestine. And we duly had that debate, and that was last September. And the vote was carried by a substantial majority, a non-binding vote by the House of Parliament to recognise Palestine, which was a very big step forward for Britain and for any European country. Other European countries have subsequently done broadly the same. Sweden, France, Germany and Italy, not Germany, sorry, Sweden, France and Italy have also made similar statements, and that to me was a very, very important step forward. But of course that hasn't actually brought about peace, and the current situation in both Gaza and the West Bank is fairly disastrous. The situation in Gaza is that the demolition that happened during Operation Cast Lead resulted in the destruction of huge numbers of houses, schools, mosques, hospitals, roads, every piece of infrastructure. And to visit, which I did in a parliamentary delegation shortly after Operation Cast Lead, was quite a depressing experience. To cross the border, the Rafah crossing as we did at that time, we then went by various buses to Gaza City, and all we could see was destroyed buildings all over the place and piles of scrap metal everywhere. But with the sort of indomitable spirit that Palestinian people had, there were crops growing everywhere. Every conceivable piece of land had been planted with either new palm trees or olive groves or vegetables or fruit trees. And they were being very well looked after, and they were actually beginning to produce things. And for a short time, Gaza actually became sustainable in fresh fruit and vegetables, self-sustaining in that, from very intensive agriculture on the very small bits of land. Remember, this is the most densely populated place in the world. The reconstruction was beginning. Qatar and others had given quite large sums of money for reconstruction, and reconstruction work was indeed going on. That reconstruction work, as was done, is now all ended. It was everything was destroyed by Operation Protective Edge, which went back and bombed exactly the same buildings that had been rebuilt from the previous bombardments. And the destruction of all the infrastructure is quite frightening. And the effect on people is quite frightening. Indeed, it didn't all stop at the ceasefire on either of those occasions. It carried on sporadic bombing. And I recall going to one house that had been bombed the day before. I don't know why it was bombed. I don't know what the reason for it was, or maybe there wasn't a reason for it. What I do know is that a family were killed, one member of the family survived, and going into the remains of the house, there was something eerie about going into somebody's kitchen, and the clock had stopped at the point when the bomb destroyed most of the rest of the house, and there was just dust and destruction all around. That was a family's home, that was a family's life. And the effect psychologically on people of this bombing during those two operations, but the continued surveillance by drone aircraft and others, has a psychological effect on people. Dr. Muna Al-Farah is a very good friend of mine. She's the director of the Gaza Mental Health Foundation. I've met her on many occasions. In fact, I first met her in 1998 when I went to Gaza at that time. And she tells me that she thinks over 70% of the population of Gaza are clinically depressed by the situation they're in. I'm not very surprised by that, because it is a very small place, as you will see from the map. It is a very densely populated place. It doesn't really have a functioning economy. There is no functioning economy. The economy relies either on employment through the Palestinian Authority, and that depends on the money coming through from Ramallah, or it relies on people working for aid agencies and whatever construction work that they can do. And so there's very high levels of unemployment. But paradoxically, it is the most educated population on the planet. 55% of the entire population of Gaza are university graduates. The rate of access to university standard of education for young people is higher than anything in this country, or indeed anywhere in Europe. So we have a very well-educated population that is largely unemployed. And growing up in an atmosphere where you can study, you can look at the world through a computer screen or a television, but you cannot actually go anywhere. And another occasion, I recall visiting a primary school, a UN Relief and Works Agency primary school. And we went onto the top floor of this school. And it was a very impressive standard of teaching going on in the school, very excitable children. We went onto the top floor. It was quite a large hall, which they used for sport and meetings and community things and so on. And then you look out of the window on one side, you see the beach, you see the Mediterranean. Look out the window on the other side, you see the fence. This is the northern part of the Gaza Strip. You see the fence, which is the border with Israel. Above the fence, you see balloons, big tethered balloons. They hold cameras on them, and those cameras are fixed on anyone approaching the border, and that sets off automatic machine gun fire of anyone coming too close to it. And so children growing up, on the one side they see a border they cannot cross. On the other side of the border they see cars, they see roads, they see trees and so on. On their side of the border they see rutted tracks, donkey carts and some vehicles. Look out to the coast, to the sea, and yes, it's a beautiful beach. Beautiful beach, astonishing. Some distance out you can see naval vessels. Those naval vessels are patrolling, they're Israeli naval vessels patrolling. So the fishermen cannot go beyond those naval vessels. The only fishing they can do is inshore fishing, and clearly the fish they get there are very small. And it's not safe for people to go out there, and indeed those vessels are often blown up or destroyed by the Israeli Navy. So I'm trying to give you a flavour of what it is like to grow up in that situation. On another occasion, the first time I went to Gaza, this was after the Intifada, and I chanced upon the home of a quite elderly lady, and we started chatting, and it turned out she was almost exactly the same age as my late mother. And so I said, well, how was life for you? And she said, well, she described the village she lived in what is now Israel, before her family were removed from there in 1948 during the Nakba. And she had lived in Gaza ever since. And she said, throughout her life, or ever since 1948, She had relied on water, food and medicine provided by the United Nations, education for her children provided by the United Nations, and all of her children had gone away. Boys who had sons. Some lived in Jordan, some had gone to USA or Europe, some were in prison, and she described it as how her life stopped when she couldn't develop because of the siege and her life in Gaza. And it's important to understand what that situation actually does to people. At the end of the Operation Protective Edge, there were quite legitimately a lot of complaints made all around the world about the way in which Gaza had been bombed, what the Israeli army and air force had done. And Navi Pillay, the outgoing High Commissioner for Human Rights, reported on Protective Edge on the 7th of July. And I'll quote a bit of it. Mr. President, Israel has stated that it has alerted Gazans before conducting strikes, including using telephones, text messages and so-called warning of roof knocks, using relatively light munitions. Even if Israel has attempted to warn civilians to, for example, leave their homes or conducted an evacuation before an attack, this does not release Israel from its obligations under international humanitarian law. Any warning for civilians must meet the requirements of international law, including this warning be clear, credible, and allow sufficient time for people to react to it. Then she goes on, and just 2 days ago, this was in July she made this, on the 21st July, shells hit the Al-Aqsa hospital in Deir el-Balah, reportedly killing at least 3 people and wounding dozens of others, including doctors. These are just a few examples of what seems to be a strong possibility that international humanitarian law has been violated in a manner that could amount to war crimes. Every one of these incidents must be properly and independently investigated. And then goes on to reiterate her calls for the lifting of the blockade of Gaza, including, and I quote again, this latest assault has wreaked further damage to Gaza's water and sanitary facilities. Fuel and medicine are in critically short supply, and electricity is reduced to a few hours a day, including ordinary households, as well as compromising the ability of hospitals to treat the many injured and to care for the most vulnerable people. The current situation in Gaza is overshadowed by the backdrop of heightened tensions in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. And saying on the 12th of June, 1,200 Palestinians have reportedly been arrested and placed with administrative detention. Israel has carried out extensive operations where homes and offices have been raided, property damaged. And then she goes on to say Israel holds obligations as an occupying power for Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The current reality is not just one of repeated conflict, but also one of protracted occupation, and goes on to describe that. And she asked that the Human Rights Council refer the case for investigation for potential war crimes. And that investigation is ongoing. The situation in Gaza is not just, as I've described, but also an environmental disaster. It is a narrow coastal strip, it is very densely populated, and it relies for its water supply on groundwater coming from the coastal aquifer. The abstraction rate from the coastal aquifer is very high because there are many people needing water. The groundwater level is falling very rapidly, and the aquifer is therefore being filled by a mixture of seawater leaching in, but also sewage leaching in from the dried up river where the sewage is poured from Gaza City and the other towns. Why is raw sewage poured into a dry river? Because the sewage works has not operated for a very long time. Israel is not allowed the parts to come through to resume the operation of that sewage work. So the sewage either leaches into the ground, into the aquifer, or flows out into sea as raw sewage. The pollution levels are appalling, the water level is falling, and it appears that more than 500,000 people, a third of the population, slightly under a third of the population, rely on untreated or dangerous water. There is a very serious problem of the environment there that has to be addressed. How can it be addressed? One would be by a desalination plant, which would give clean water to the people, apart from the sea. That requires energy, that requires a lot of parts, that requires a lot of process in order to do that. None of those things are allowed in through the siege of Gaza, so the problem continues. Electricity supplies are sporadic because it relies on old diesel generators which require A, fuel, and B, maintenance. Both of those things are sporadic, and being in Gaza, there are frequent power cuts all the time, and if you look north to Ashkelon in Israel, energy supplies carry on the whole time. Look out to sea to the north, and further up there are Israeli drilling rigs looking for gas and developing the gas reserves off the coast. So we have not a natural disaster in Gaza, we have a human-made humanitarian disaster in Gaza, which must be addressed. It cannot go on like this. That level of poverty, that level of unemployment, that level of psychiatric attack, which is what the drone aircraft amount to for the people of Gaza. And public opinion ebbs and flows. In the height of a crisis, people do give money, do give support, and do give donations. When it's not in the front page of the news, the donations are not quite as forthcoming, but there is a need for it. And I was indeed, in February 2013, part of a delegation looking at the aid projects that have been done by both Interpal and Medical Aid for Palestine to charities that have been raising money and working there. And some of the stuff they've done was very impressive. I went to Al Sharif Hospital, which has been improved a great deal, and actually saw the burns unit that I'd been at an event in London raising money for to buy and build this burns unit. So there was a sense of sort of circular conclusion that our efforts to raise money for this burns unit had meant the burns unit had been built and it was treating people, and I talked to some of the patients that were being treated there. The conditions were not particularly good in the hospital, but at least there was a burns unit. And why is there a burns unit needed? I assumed it was all to do with the war and bombardments. No. Burns units are more of a problem because the electricity supply is so sporadic. People light their homes either with candles or by lighting a fire outside, and the homes are not often particularly well constructed, and they catch fire and people get burnt as a result of that. And so it's just a human, absolutely preventable disaster. The two other aspects of Palestine I want to refer to before I move on to the wider politics of the whole area are this. The West Bank is big. It is very beautiful in many places, and there are amazing parts of history to look at. There are amazing things to see, and the Dead Sea is something that to visit the Dead Sea to me was quite an amazing experience. Even if I did go in the middle of winter when it was quite cold, I was still impressed to see it. But to travel around the West Bank is very difficult. I was saying to Habib, on one occasion, my partner and I had been to Jericho, and it took us 6 hours to get from Jericho to Jerusalem. You can almost see Jericho from Jerusalem. With a clear run and an open road, it would be 20 minutes, half hour. It's no real distance at all. We were stopped at checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint, held for a long time, and in a sense, I didn't mind. I was there as a delegation visiting. I was interested to see the place, and I didn't sort of object in that sense. What I did object to was the ritual humiliation of Palestinian people going through these checkpoints. Building workers who spent a whole day on a building site, working really hard, really tired, exhausted at the end of it, being abused when they arrive at a checkpoint, being told by a young soldier from behind a glass, just wait over there, I'll see you when I'm good and ready, and having to wait for hours just to return home. And then talking to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency in Jerusalem, trying to run an ambulance service, big ambulance service, for the whole country, cannot get staff to come in because they cannot get across checkpoints. So half the ambulances not operating most of the time, simply because there's nobody to drive them, nobody to maintain them. Checkpoints after checkpoints, and the humiliation that goes with them are a cause and a source of very deep, serious anger. Another anecdote, because I think sometimes the human experience is more important than the bigger political picture. I was at the Kalandia checkpoint, and a lady, Palestinian lady, was trying to go through with her children, 3 children, all really beautifully dressed. They were on their way to a family party. It was a weekend, family reunion. They were going through the checkpoint to go to the family party. And they were all there with their presents and everything else. They just got a torrent of abuse from a group of young soldiers, like, who the hell do you think you are? Where do you think you're going? Why are you all dressed up like that? And then denied the right to go, and they had to go home. And it was translated for me, and this little child saying, "Mummy, why can't we go?" And she had to try and explain that they lived under occupation. And these arrogant young men in this box could decide whether they could travel or whether they could not. What does that do to that child? What is the memory for that child when they're older, other than that ritual humiliation? We all remember things of our childhood because it's a very intense period and you notice things. And then go to try and drive around or travel around the West Bank. You'll find roads that are settler-only roads, and you'll see hectare after hectare, massive areas of land that are taken over for settlements, where the Palestinian people are being removed, the settlements are built, and the water is taken from the Palestinian people, and the anger that goes with that, and the inability to have a functioning economy whilst you can't even move around, is obviously very, very serious. The wall that is being built, euphemistically called the separation barrier, is, if it was unfurled, would stretch halfway across Europe. It's a very long wall. It goes sort of like this in strange routes and things. And it cuts off farmers from their land. It goes through the middle of olive groves. It makes life impossible for people. And indeed, in Bethlehem, it sort of goes down a street at one point. And there was a cafe on the street, but the wall is now down the middle of the street. So the owner of the cafe has now renamed his cafe the Wall Cafe and used the wall to paint the menu on the cafe. There was a cafe outside, so he's called it Wall Burgers, Wall Pizzas, Wall Everything. And then there are others that paint the most amazing murals on them, including Banksy and many others, as an act of defiance. But why is the West Bank under occupation? Why is Israel allowed to get away with taking all these areas of land, all these resources, and then, when anyone protests, imprisoning them, jailing them, including children, as a result of it? And the brutality that goes with it, and the horrors that go with it, are the cause of, really, the whole of the conflict. So politically, what's the reason for this? Israel was formed in 1948 by UN resolution, and a border was placed. It wasn't agreed by the neighbouring countries, but it was a UN resolution. There was a delineation of the original boundaries of Israel. There were subsequent wars, but the most notable was the 1967 Six-Day War, in which there was this massive expansion. And we're still living with the consequences of the 1967 Six-Day War. We're still living with the occupation as a result of it. And the settlement policy, which goes on and on, is the manifestation of all of that. But the rest of the world condemns it. But what does Israel do? The US, under President Obama, at one stage had a policy of saying no settlements. All settlements must go as a precursor to a negotiated peace process to bring about long-term peace. The Israeli government said, "No way, we're not doing that. Not doing that." So Obama changed his line and said, "Okay, you're not doing that. Let's say no new settlements then." And the Israeli government thought for a short time, said, no, we're not doing that. So Obama finally said, well, can we reduce the rate of new settlements being built and reduce the speed at which you take over Palestinian land? Netanyahu said, no way, that's an interference in Israeli life. I mean, we have a government in Israel that is obsessed with the settlement policy. These settlements are actually illegal. To trade with these settlements is illegal. There is European law, there is international law about trading in settlement goods, yet they still get through. So there are companies that sell settlement goods. The list of those companies is on the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and other websites. The Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions Policy campaign has that information about boycotting settlement goods which are on land stolen from Palestinian people. The third area of Palestinian life is that of the refugees. They don't often get a mention, but there are 5 million Palestinians, roughly speaking, living within West Bank and Gaza. There are many, many, many more living in refugee camps in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, or in a diaspora all over the world. The diaspora all over the world have had quite important political effect. If anyone had been following the arcane arguments about recognition of Palestine at the UN, they'll find that every country in the American continent, with the exception of the USA and Canada, has voted to recognise Palestine, has ambassadors, exchange ambassadors, and gives full recognition. Partly because Latin American people recognise a people under pressure and a people under occupation, but also because there is a Palestinian diaspora in most of those countries, particularly in Argentina and Chile, that have done a great deal of political campaigning which has had a huge effect. And indeed Mexico the same, where there's been recognition for a very long time. So in a sense, the Palestinian diaspora, sad to be a diaspora, are in a safer and economically slightly better position than those in refugee camps. But those living in the refugee camps in Lebanon, they're more like small towns or villages. Very poor conditions, very overcrowded, very limited economic opportunities, and again rely on the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for food, for water, for medicine. And they are very sad and very depressing places. I've been to Sabra and Shamtia. I went to a house, to a lot of houses actually, and I was talking to this old man there, very old man. And he had left his village in what is now Israel in 1948. And I said, what was the village like? And he sat down with tears in his eyes and described every building, every tree, the stream and everything of his village. And he said, could you go and see it for me? He can't go there, I can. He is not allowed to go to the village that he was brought up in and grew up in. He is forever in this refugee camp where he has children, where he has grandchildren, where he now has great-grandchildren. Is it really right that we leave people in a refugee camp for more than 70 years? And then in Syria, there are very large numbers of Palestinian refugees. I was in Syria before the outbreak of the current war, and I went there to try and persuade the then Syrian government to allow in a group of Palestinian refugees that had been driven out of Iraq following the US and British invasion. And they were stuck in no man's land on the border in the desert between Iraq and Syria. And so with parliamentary colleagues from all parties, we drove to this camp, went to see the families there, and we then went back to Damascus and we met the UN and government representatives and so on, and there was actually at the end quite a good outcome, and they were all then allowed into Syria. Goodness knows what's happened to them now, but they were then allowed into Syria. Because they were very dangerous, and they had gas heaters in the tents, it was very cold, and the tents had caught fire and they couldn't get out, and the children were burnt to death in the tent. And I then started talking to a family about their sort of family history. And they again had been driven out of their home with the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, and had been on an odyssey all around the region. They'd been in just about every country in the region. It was like a big circle, and they ended up then in Syria, hoping one day to go further south to Palestine from where they came. And I saw these children, quite very bright kids this family had. And I said to this girl, she was about 13, 14, I said, what's your ambition? She said, I want to be a doctor. She wants to be a doctor. She's living in a tent in a refugee camp in the middle of a desert with a home destroyed behind her, a future ahead of her totally unknown and uncertain, and her determination was to be a doctor. Are we denying these children that chance? Yes, we are. We are, by refugee camps, by this policy, by this denial of the rights of Palestinian people. And so, when I say that I support Palestine, it's because I support people that are under pressure and are under occupation. You're going to have to look to the politics of it and how it goes forward. If a country invades another, a country occupies another, a country capriciously imprisons people from that place, then normally there are international consequences. There are sanctions placed, there is legal action taken, and so on. Israel, on the other hand, receives massive amounts of US aid in order to sustain its economy, receives huge amounts of military aid from the USA as well, and continues the occupation and continues the illegal treatment of Palestinian people and Palestinian prisoners. And we, in Britain, whilst we don't give aid directly to Israel, we do have a considerable degree of arms trade with Israel. We do manufacture some of the parts for drone aircraft in Britain, and indeed we do buy arms as well as sell arms to Israel. And in Parliament we've therefore pushed for the recognition of Palestine as a state. We've also pushed for an end to all arms supplies to Israel. Indeed, the Joint Committee on Arms Exports has said as much, that we shouldn't be selling those arms to Israel. But you have to ask yourself the question, what is it that can actually bring about peace and justice for the people of the region? Now, I'm not in favour of anyone bombing anybody. I'm not in favour of Israel dropping bombs on Gaza. I'm not in favour of anyone firing rockets at civilian targets anywhere else. So I'm actually against all the violence that goes with it. I have to recognise there's a disproportionality about all of this, that the Hamas rockets are small in number and minimal in effect compared to the power of the Israeli armed forces, the F-16 jets that go in and routinely destroy life and destroy buildings there. So in solidarity action has to be taken, and that is what has been happening all around the world. Full recognition and human rights of the people of Palestine have got to be first and foremost on the agenda. Recognition that the occupation is fundamentally wrong, and recognition of the rights of those refugees to return home are essential to it. But Israel is a major player in the whole region. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons. How did it get nuclear weapons? Interesting question. Developed them in secret at the Dimona research reactor in the Negev desert, the same place where the Bedouin people are being driven away from the Negev desert and forced to live in concrete settlements, so the land can then be given over to Israeli farmers. Israel developed a nuclear reactor, and from that developed a nuclear weapons, and has a delivery system capable of delivering them. How do we know this? Because Mordecai Vanunu, who was employed to work at the Dimona reactor, could bear it no longer and told the world about it. And the story was put in the Sunday Times more than 20 years ago about this, 30 years ago. And he was eventually about eternally punishing Mordecai Vanunu for trying to bring about peace. Israel has nuclear weapons, and 2 weeks' time, next month, April rather, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference takes place in New York. The review conference is of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which most states in the world have signed up to, the 5 declared nuclear weapon states, Britain, France, China, Russia, and the USA. by treaty, are not supposed to be expanding their nuclear stockpile or developing a new generation of nuclear weapons, and all the other states that have signed the treaty must not develop their own nuclear weapons and declare themselves nuclear weapons free. And it has had a good effect. Africa is a nuclear weapons free zone, Latin America is a nuclear weapons free zone, Central Asia is a nuclear weapons free zone, but the danger is in the Middle East. The conference recognised that Israel is not a signatory to nuclear non-proliferation treaty, but the presence of any nuclear weapons in the region are a danger and could provoke somebody else into developing. The argument is Iran might develop nuclear weapons, and there are negotiations going on with Iran. Indeed, I met a group of parliamentarians from Iran yesterday to debate and discuss these issues. The NPT conference agreed that there should be a weapons of mass destruction free zone for the whole Middle East, a conference to organise it. Finland is supposed to be organising this conference. The conference has never happened. It would be the one opportunity for Israel and Iran to sit around the same table and at least agree they're not going to use or develop nuclear weapons. Iran remains a signatory to the NPT, it does not have nuclear weapons. That has not happened. If that conference does not take place, and this review conference ends up with a nil result on that, then the danger is that Saudi Arabia, Egypt, or somebody else could develop nuclear weapons and set off a chain reaction of nuclear developments all across the region. Does Israel need nuclear weapons? Because if they use nuclear weapons against the Palestinians, they'd be killing as many Israeli people as they would Palestinians. There is no justification, in my view, for anybody having nuclear weapons, and I see no reason at all why Israel should have those nuclear weapons and why there is no sanction taken against Israel for the possession of them. During the campaigns in solidarity with Palestinian people, we were presented with the view that the demonstrations took place in certain places, in certain countries, and lots of people were on the streets of London and other cities. Absolutely true. I've never seen such big demonstrations in support of the Palestinian people. But there were also considerable demonstrations in Israel against the bombing, against the imprisonment of Palestinian people, and saying our government is going in the wrong direction. The settlement policy, the aggression, the imprisonment, the maltreatment of prisoners, the imprisonment of Palestinian parliamentarians, and all the rest of it is wrong, and there has to be a dialogue. Those peace demonstrations, small in number I accept, they weren't a majority of the population by any manner of means, do indicate there are people in Israel that think that they want to live in the Middle East, they want to live with Palestinians in the Middle East, and indeed with many other people within the region. And that, I think, is a cause for some degree of hope. But unless there is political action taken, principally by the US and the European Union, then the occupation will continue, the oppression of Palestinian people will continue, and the anger of young people in Palestine will lead people to set off bombs. It will lead people to send rockets. It will lead to all the destruction that nobody wants to see. You cannot imprison and oppress a people and not see consequences as a result of it. And so in our discussions, let's think about that and think about the psychology of it and think about a strategy that brings about a long-term peace and justification for the lives of ordinary people. Because Palestinians have been abominably treated. Palestinians have a shorter life expectancy than others. Difficulties of access to food, medicine, water, and everything else. It's not right. And it is not a natural disaster. It's a human-made disaster. Even our own Foreign Office that's just been produced today, every single one of them, I've done hundreds of meetings dozens of meetings on Palestine. We always have speakers from Jews for Justice in Palestine. We have speakers of Muslim faith, Christian faith, Hindu faith, or no faith. This is a campaign about human rights and human justice. And I think talking to somebody of Sir Gerald's generation, who was a young boy at the time of the foundation of the State of Israel, which he's then reached this position. And I think we should just remember that that's a journey a lot of people have made and are still making, both in Britain and in the USA. Sorry to give you a long answer. I don't know if it's helpful, but it's...
Yeah, that's okay.
Hi. I was wondering what you'd say to this argument, which I'm not necessarily saying is my view, but The argument goes as follows: like, even if on paper Israel withdrew from the majority of the West Bank and a Palestinian state was created, the facts on the ground, given all the highways to the West Bank and Israeli controlling the airspace and everything, would mean that even though there was de facto even though on paper there was a Palestinian state, Israel would still maintain a matrix of control, so in reality it would not be a truly independent state. And so if one assumes that argument is correct, then by supporting a bill to recognise Palestine, would that not be the same as, say, in the 1980s supporting a bill to recognise the independence of one of the Bantu stands created by the apartheid South African government?
Interesting question. Yes, I never supported Botswana. Absolutely didn't. That was one of the Bantu stands, and the apartheid absolutely didn't. At the moment, Israel does control the borders, all of them, and indeed the border between Egypt and Gaza, before it was closed, which it now is largely, was indeed controlled by Israel, and the cooperation between Egyptian and Israeli security is probably very close. Is it creating a controlled and occupied state? Well, at the moment, yes, it is a controlled and occupied state. Does voting for the recognition of Palestine condone that? No. I had a lot of thoughts about this, because I do understand the argument you're putting forward. It is an interesting argument. I took the view that I'm in solidarity with the people under occupation. I must be guided by what they want if I want to be in solidarity with them. And all the messages I was getting from everybody was that we should support this recognition. Indeed, I attended a conference in Tunisia of all of the Palestinian groups. They were all there, and they all supported the principle of recognition by European countries as a way of breaking the logjam and giving access to international justice, International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, World Court, which of course now Palestine has got the recognition vote through the General Assembly, but not Security Council, can apply for membership of those organisations and has done so. Do I support the idea of Israel controlling all aspects of Palestinian life? Obviously not. But I do think a recognition helps that process along, where you do gain real independence of Palestinian people. It's not simple, it's not quick, it's not easy, but it's got to be better than living under occupation and bombardment. You're the chair, not me.
Oh yeah, we'll take a question there and then over here.
Why has Israel not been prosecuted by the ICC?
Well, Israel is not a member of the ICC, and neither is the USA, which I always find it very interesting, the way the USA sits in judgment on the Security Council and refers cases to the ICC to a court it doesn't itself recognise. I think there's a contradiction there. There could well be a case to the ICC. The investigation is going on at the moment. To be fair, the investigation is, of course, about the bombardment of Gaza, and what I quoted from what Navai Pillay said in her report at the Human Rights Council is also into the use of rockets against Israel. But, of course, if Israel doesn't want to go to the International Criminal Court, then it can hardly take out a prosecution against anybody else for what's happened there. Is this whole process going to drag Israel into the orbit much more of international law than it is at the moment? Yeah, I think it probably will. And I hope Palestine does gain full membership of the International Criminal Court and does use it, and does use all the other things as well. Surely the direction of using international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions and all the other things, has got to be better than seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of young people killed by a renewed bombardment campaign. But there is, taking your question slightly further, there is an immediate humanitarian crisis in Gaza that has got to be dealt with. You would have seen the television coverage of the winter that's just happened in the Middle East, in the coldest winter for a very long time. And it might be in the Middle East, it might be next to the Mediterranean. It is very, very cold in winter in Palestine and Lebanon and all those other countries. Very heavy snowfall and so on. There was also flooding, which of course then is flooding of polluted water from the inoperative sewage works, and that then spreads disease and all that goes with that. There's a humanitarian crisis now in Gaza, and whilst the British and other governments are providing quite a lot of financial aid, many of us have given money to various appeals. If Israel, as it does, controls all the crossing points into Gaza, then the medicines can't get in, the reconstruction materials can't get in. I mean, you talk to people in medical aid for Palestine, Interpal and all the others, they sort of tear their hair out trying to get a pallet load of medicines across a border in order to treat people that are desperately in need of them. This humanitarian crisis has got to be addressed.
We'll take Iran and then...
Yeah.
So I understood from what you were saying before that you were involved in the boycott campaign against South Africa. That had a really dramatic effect on the apartheid regime there. Do you think that the boycott in the best mentioned sanctions campaign against Israeli settlements or against Israel in general can have as a dramatic effect on ending the occupation?
The South African boycott campaign, which I was involved with, I was involved in anti-apartheid from the late 1960s, had more of a political than an economic effect actually on South Africa, I would say. And boycotting of Barclays Bank and the sporting boycott of South Africa had a massive effect on it. It was more of a political symbolism in that the white South African population felt minoritized by it, and they felt isolated from the rest of the world. It had a significant effect for that. It's been a long, slow process, but we've now reached a position where the European Union says there shouldn't be any importation of settlement-produced goods, and if you look at products from the Jordan River, products and things like that, they are actually settlement goods that are masked and badged as products of Israel. They're not products of Israel, they've come from settlements. They are not legal goods and they should not be on sale in this country. So it's up to the EU and its member states, including this one, to enforce and implement that. And do I think it has an effect? Yes, I do, because Veolia, for example, were involved in the construction of the tram line in West Jerusalem. Have now pulled out of that altogether, and they pulled out other contracts. G4S are reviewing their contracts because of the pressure they're under from a number of places. And if I don't know why anybody would want to employ G4S anyway. That's a different issue. That has had an effect, and also SodaStream closing its factory altogether because of actions that were taken all over the world. The economic effect, debatable. Political effect is absolutely enormous, and the consciousness-raising effect is absolutely enormous. And I think that's the important part of it.
Take two questions at the same time, I guess.
Yeah, so I wonder how important you think the West's current talks with Iran are for Bibi Netanyahu's political future. So if I would agree with Netanyahu when he says Iran poses an existential threat to the state of Israel. That's right in that if Tehran is considered an important capital in the Middle East and is listened to, then suddenly Bibi's rhetoric is completely devalued. So, yeah, I wonder how important you think talks with Iran are. And
I think the relationship with Iran is a very important one. It's a very significant issue. Sometimes politicians have very short understanding of history, but other people don't. So I think Britain should remember a bit about Iran. We have successively occupied Iran, taken a great deal of Iran's oil, and treated it as a colony at various times. Indeed, BP's antecedents were the Anglo-Iranian Oil Corporation, which was nationalised by Winston Churchill to form BP. I mean, it was Winston Churchill's one venture into state socialism. He soon regretted it, it's all right. But then Britain was a party to the coup against the national government of Iran in 1952. That brought the Shah into power and the very oppressive period. That then turned into the Islamic Revolution and the problems that go with that, including a massive abuse of human rights. There is now a coming together, in a sense, and recognition with Iran, which is important. I was on a delegation to Iran last year, first British parliamentary delegation to Iran for a very long time. I went with 3 other MPs that I don't actually agree with on, well, anything really, anything very much. And so it was quite a difficult week from my point of view. What do you talk about for a whole week? But where we did agree was that there had to be a relationship with Iran. And so the 2 issues we were discussing was 1, the nuclear issue, and 2, from my point of view, the human rights issue. The nuclear issue because, personally, I don't think anyone should have nuclear power, but in law you're allowed to. And Iran is asserting its right to develop nuclear power. It can do that. They don't, at the moment, have nuclear weapons. They are under a degree of inspection by the International Atomic Energy Authority. There have been arguments about levels of obstruction or otherwise, but there has been a fatwa issued against nuclear weapons and holding them by the Supreme Leader. And I think that the process of negotiations and an agreement with Iran on nuclear processing is very important, and it's quite appalling that the Republican right in the USA should try to torpedo what Obama and the administration are trying to do in reaching that agreement. I am appalled at the human rights record in Iran. The treatment of women, the death penalty and execution, but also recognise that it's a very successful country in many ways. There are more women than men in university. There is a huge development in lots of ways, and it's a very interesting place to understand. And yesterday I had a 2-hour meeting with other colleagues with this delegation of Iranian parliamentarians, and I raised all the concerns I always do about human rights, executions, religious minorities, religious expression, and so on. And there was an argument, there was a huge argument going on, and they said, well, your country is just as bad because it bombed Iraq and Afghanistan. I thought, excuse me, I'm the chair of the Stop the War Coalition, I've never bombed anywhere, and I'm not in favour of anyone bombing anywhere. They said, well, not you, but the rest of them. So, okay. But the result was, at the end of it, they did agree that they would reopen talks on human rights issues, and they would accept a delegation to go and have a further discussion about that. It's not what I want. I want to go much further, but there has to be a dialogue, and there's got to be a relationship with Iran. If you go the other way, then those in Iran that would want to develop nuclear weapons will develop them, and you will have the nuclear arms race across the region, which is why I made such an emphasis about the NPT process. Netanyahu, the last thing Netanyahu wants is a rapprochement between Europe, the USA, Russia, and Iran. It's the last thing he wants. It's the perfect thing for Netanyahu. He can get up every single day of his life and go to the Knesset and say, we're under threat from Iran. Nonsense it may well be, but he can keep on saying that, and that then justifies militarization, it justifies bombing, it justifies a lot of other things he does. And so I think it's important to develop that relationship with Iran. And as a start, they could reopen both the embassies. They're almost reopened. I've been to the British Embassy in Tehran. It's not that badly damaged. It could reopen tomorrow, honestly. There's a bit of exaggeration gone on there. And that would be a good step forward. And also that the Iranian diaspora here should be allowed to travel freely back and forth, and also send money back and forth, because that's important. And also I met hundreds of young people in Tehran that want to come and study at universities in Britain, including York. They want to come to York, okay?
So yeah.
A few things actually. First,
Sure.
while there's a government in Israel now thinks everything's a threat to it, there had been moments.
Sorry?
I said, even though there's a government in Israel that thinks everything's an existential threat,
Yeah, yeah.
there have been periods in Israeli history, brief periods, where there has been attempts at approachments. There was a Sharon 2005, and it was Rabin.
Yeah.
So why have
Rabin
these,
particularly, yeah.
yes. So besides dramatic reasons, why have these attempts failed, and what can we do in the West, in the UK, to identify and support these movements within Israel for reconciliation. And also, in the short term, do you see any coalition, say, within 1 or 2 elections in Israel, that would be more favorable to Palestine than the current? And actually, again, just one more thing. You just mentioned that you favor dialogue with Iran for improving human rights. So I just want to see what your rationale is for hoping for dialogue with Iran to improve human rights while boycotting Israel, not using the same arguments to improve Israeli human rights.
Well, there is a dialogue with Israel that goes on all the time. But Iran isn't actually bombing anywhere else. Iran isn't invading any other country, isn't occupying any other country. Israel is. Israel is occupying the West Bank and undertaking the siege of Gaza. So there is a difference there. Iran is under sanctions at the moment and is suffering under sanctions, particularly in respect of medicines and high-tech equipment. Some of the sanctions are actually counterproductive because it might just increase Chinese sales in Iran. But it was made very clear to us yesterday that they did see a relationship, shall we put it that way, between the lifting of European banking sanctions with the nuclear issue, with also the human rights agenda. I'm kind of alarmed that the human rights bit always falls off the end of the agenda. And I was at a meeting this morning, a press conference this morning, about human rights in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, where British protestations about human rights abuses are pretty muted because they're more interested in selling arms. And so, it's not a totally equal game. What will happen in Israel now after the election? Well, obviously it depends on the outcome of the election. Israeli politics are quite complicated. It seems that because of the nature of coalition governments there, very small extreme right religious parties hold a disproportionate amount of power, and the settlers have a completely disproportionate amount of power within Israeli politics. And we might be moving into a repeated era of coalition politics in Britain, which might have the same problems here, I don't know. But surely the message has got to be that those people in Israel that are serious about peace, serious about dialogue, they're the ones that should at least get some recognition of what they're saying and what they're trying to do. There are people in Israel that do not like what Netanyahu does and do not like the militarization of their society, and they don't, and they see growing up in a militarized society as something that they don't want and deeply unpleasant. But there is younger Israelis, as well, I've certainly noticed it, are themselves actually quite heavily militarized in a lot of their attitudes. And I think that is, to me, depressing.
Should I take a question here? No? Yeah?
Yes, who's next?
Yeah?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay, so I have 2 questions. The first one is regarding the Arab countries and the fact that I feel like the situation has kind of switched, where you would see a lot of support at one point in the Arab nations for Palestine, or the discourse, the political discourse was very much about Palestine and supporting Palestine and it being the first cause and the only cause for the Middle East and the Arab world. And now I feel like there has been a switch with the Egyptian stance on the conflict, with the Gulf countries donating, Qatar donating a lot of money, but at the same time Saudi and Kuwait donating much less and not even fulfilling the pledge. And I feel as if the support is kind of shifting to Europe and less so in the Middle East, where the Middle East is kind of not really paying as much attention to the cause as much as they had. So how would you explain the current situation in the Arab, or amongst the Arab nations, or their regimes, to be more specific, with regards to Palestine? And I also had another question. Now, the other question.
Take 2 together. Yeah.
The other question is regarding the truce in Gaza. Now, a lot of people saw it as a victory for the Palestinians because Netanyahu went and he signed the document or the truce without actually discussing it with members of his government, because he knew how much against it they would be. And then eventually people started talking about the removing the the limitation on fishing, reopening the Gaza airport. But then you look now and there isn't much that has changed. So do you feel like it is just talk, it's just something that they worked up in order to end the conflict, or it's something that could be actually, like, was the truce actually useful, was it actually successful, or was it just nothing?
On the first one, on the Arab countries and their support for Palestine, there's always been a huge amount of nationalist rhetoric in every Arab country in support of Palestine. I mean, I've heard the most amazing speeches in support of Palestine in Egypt in the past, and they don't actually add up to a hill of beans, because they don't actually do anything at all and give precious little support, and indeed actually cooperate with Israel on the siege of Gaza in many ways. And under Mubarak, I remember a meeting with the foreign ministry in Cairo, and we got into a long argument about it all, and they seemed to me to be almost as hostile to Palestinians as anything else, and they were not particularly helpful. Other countries, the aid levels have gone up. Certainly Qatar has provided quite large amounts of aid, and indeed the Emir did visit Gaza, and there are lots of trucks going in and out, or at times there have been anyway, carrying building material in Gaza, and they have given more. And indeed there are, in the case of Qatar, some Palestinians who now work in Qatar. As I explained earlier, it's a very well-qualified population in Gaza, and they are getting work there. At the end of the latest round of bombing, there was the truce that was agreed in Cairo. And I thought that was a very interesting process, because the Israeli government's position, Netanyahu's position, has always been, we will never talk to Hamas because Hamas has an aspiration of a greater Palestine. He seems to forget that his own party, the Likud, also has an aspiration of a greater Israel, which is the same map, actually. And they said they would never talk to Hamas. Well, they did. I mean, whether they were sitting around the same table, I'm not sure, but they were certainly there in the hotel having proximity discussions which brought about the agreement on the truce. Now, the truce had a number of elements to it, but the three that you mentioned are very important ones. One was fishing, two was the airport, and three was movements of people. The fishing one said that the limit on fishing would be lifted and the boats could go much further out to international waters. That has only happened in part. There's been some improvement in fishing, but not very much. They still can't go as far out as they ought to. Indeed, I went to the fish market in Gaza when the limit was, I think, 3 kilometres. And the fish they were catching was pretty pathetic, really. They were very proud of actually what were very small fish, and it was what ought to be a thriving fish market was very, very limited. So the right to fish is a very, very important one. The airport, I went to see the airport when it had just been finished during the Oslo process. I think it was 1998, and the airport is there, was there. Buildings were quite magnificent, beautifully decorated, mosaic tiles and pictures of Yasser Arafat and stuff like that all around. It was quite an amazing building, and there were children going on school visits to see the airport. And this was a time of the most unbelievable hope. Roads had been built, people could travel, the airport was going to open, and all that. And then what's happened now? The airport's been completely destroyed, all the buildings have been destroyed, and it's a major construction work just to get the runway into operation, never mind the terminal buildings and all the control tower and all those kind of things. Nothing has happened on that because Israel will not allow through building materials. Indeed, an Israeli businessman was in prison recently for trying to sell steel to Gaza for construction work, when it was said that what he was selling was going to be used to make rockets, and he was put in prison as a result of it. On the movements of people, very, very limited progress has been made on that. There are some people that manage to move in and out of Gaza either by being officials of the authority or for education, and there is a British consular office in Gaza City that processes a very small number of applications, but it is very, very limited. Egypt has now responded because of the unrest in Sinai and the allegations of the Brotherhood and its activities there and their relationship with Hamas, to create a buffer zone between Gaza and Israel, which is huge. Hundreds of houses have been demolished to make this flat space that nobody can can go across. And so Egypt is actually more intensely putting Gaza under siege than Israel is at the present time. And how that fits with the rhetoric in Cairo supporting the inalienable right of the Palestinian people, President Sisi must answer. But the sense of support for the Palestinian people across all of North Africa by ordinary people is very great. In Tunisia, after the oddly named Arab Spring, I was at an event where a lot of people had come out of political prison. They'd been political prisoners under the Ali regime in Tunisia, and they came out to a sports hall where they were welcome to meet their families. It was quite an emotional and amazing occasion. And they came out waving Palestinian flags, which was quite remarkable, because remember there's been a close relationship between Palestine and Tunisia because the PLO were moved there in 1982 after the bombardment of Sabra and Shamtila, and they do commemorate the bombing in 1986 of the PLO officers and the deaths of people there. They used to have an annual commemoration of it in Tunisia. It's a very live, emotional issue there. Whether the new Tunisian government will be more corrupt from Palestine, I think it probably will. That's certainly the impression I got when I was in Tunisia.
Should we take the final question?
The final question, sir.
Or
I was born in London, but my family comes from Cyprus, and it's a very similar situation to Palestine, although not on the same kind of level. But as a young person, it feels like the identity of being Cypriot or being Palestinian has always been that of occupation and historical injustice. And it feels like for me that so many generations have been through, well, 2 in this Cypriot case and 3 or 4 perhaps in the Palestinian case have been through the injustice. I'm actually wondering what it will actually take for a monumental change to occur and how that's going to happen and what the future will be for the movement and whether we're actually going to see the perpetrators who are such powerful countries ever have that overturned.
The partition of Cyprus was 1974 when the Turkish invasion took place, and my constituency has a lot of Cypriots in it, less than it used to be because it sort of spread out a bit more across London. There was before that was in Haringey, there was a very large Cypriot population, and it's real life. They lost homes, they lost family, they lost space, and I remember going to see an old Greek Cypriot in Cyprus. And he sat in this room and looked out the window where the barrier was with northern Cyprus. And he said, "That's my land." He couldn't go there. And it's personal, it's brutal. And there has to be a reunification. And are we going to see a reunification of Cyprus? I hope so. There has been some progress made. There was a rather ill-timed referendum which resulted in the rejection by the Cypriot, southern Cyprus, the Republic of Cyprus, and acceptance by the north of the Annan Plan, because the Annan Plan hadn't been properly thought through. Is there space for another Annan Plan? Yes, there has to be. There has to be some way forward. It's simply unconscionable that you can carry on with the partition of Cyprus and that coming together. Cyprus, of course, had a very interesting history because of being a British base. There still are British bases there, but also was a staging post for a lot of these Israelis, Jewish refugees who went there after the Second World War before going on to Israel. So it's kind of very live in the whole area. And then, of course, there's the oil and gas exploration issue as well, which is live there. Is there going to be a reunification of Cyprus? I really do hope so, and I think there will be, actually. I'm hopeful, if that's helpful.
I think I've just got time for just one more.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, in my mind at least, it seems as if the only real long-term way forwards is going to have to be a negotiated settlement of some description. And obviously, Israel at present does not want to approach that. And as the larger and more aggressive power, it clearly has more responsibility to approach that. But I guess the question is, how do you get Israel to the point of negotiation? How is that going to be possible?
I think the answer lies as much as anything in the USA, actually. And it doesn't look good at the moment because you've got a very right-wing Republican majority in Congress that will block anything that Obama tries to do, and Obama has not been that effective or that assertive on it anyway. Will public opinion change in the USA? Yeah, I think it will actually. I think there is a move there. Because remember, there's some fundamentals in US politics that whilst, because of particularly the Senate, because of the very strange electoral system they have in the USA, which disproportionately empowers small states as opposed to big states in the Senate, means that the Senate will often be different from the presidency. So it's quite possible the Democrats will win successive presidential elections on the basis of the demographics of the USA and the voting habits of them. Is public opinion changing in the USA? Yes. Who'd have thought 10 years ago that there would be a letter signed by 96 rabbis in the New York Times calling for peace with Palestine? Who'd have thought that would have been impossible? You know, things have changed and things are moving. Europe has changed dramatically on this. Most European parliaments, European national parliaments, have now voted for a form of recognition of Palestine. That is a huge change on processes 10, 15 years ago. Yeah, I think there will be a change, and it's up to all of us to politically campaign for it. What's the alternative? Another bombardment, more killing, more occupation, more settlements, more death, more destruction, more bitterness? That's the alternative. Palestinian people have been wronged by history and they deserve to get their place. And that's why I think it's great we can go to this meeting here tonight. Thank you very much, Abhi.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Small token of appreciation of actually Palestinian olive oil, very good. That's an olive oil and
I was shocked to remember I thought it was wine.
that's after the event. Some dates and stuff. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank everyone here for coming here. As you know, you probably follow us on Facebook or get our regular emails. Had a lot of events throughout the year. It's the last event this term, obviously. Had loads of events throughout the year. We simulated some checkpoints like Mr. Corbyn was talking about. Had, during this Radio Apartheid week, had some speakers and things. It was very, very great to see growing support, especially in a UK campus and a big one such as York, for Palestine, for the Palestinians, for human rights, justice, great freedom, justice and equality for Palestinians. And we hope that we can keep going further and further, especially if people like Mr. Corbyn keep supporting us and keep coming in.
I've got to get elected again first.
Yeah. Yeah. We're having, I don't know if you've heard this or you've seen this on the YouTube blog, we're having a referendum next term. I can't officially tell you which way to vote, but you probably figured that out once you see the question. We're encouraging you to adopt a motion to boycott any products produced in illegal Israeli settlements, as Mr. Corbyn has explained a lot about, and which I encourage you to go read more about and learn more of how much of an injustice they are and why they are illegal under international law. Please look out for that. We'll keep posting updates and keep following us. We're also on Twitter now. Twitter, Facebook, keep following the emails. If you want to get in touch with us, committee members are here. Rehan is in the back if you want to come chat to me after the event. If you want to talk about the referendum, Andrew and Iran here if you want to chat to them. Again, thanks a lot for coming. If you want to sign up to our mailing list, we're going to have a paper here. Feel free to take anything, any of the flyers, badges, stickers that are from here. They're free if you want to take some on the door. Thanks a lot for coming. Hope to see you soon.